I mean, all we have to do is, in terms of the police, look here in this council tonight and see the threat we have. We have a 145 person individual in this 145 pound individual in this chamber, about 5'4", that has the ability to take pictures with a cell phone. Now, if we're not threatened by that, I think we ought to re-examine our whole issues.
Please stay on the issue, please, Mr. Goodhue.
Well, it is. The issue is we should not take away from the police department or from any public safety element in order to fund this. And I don't think we need to with astute leadership. The question is, we need to find the astute leadership. Thank you.
In Kelsey's defense, I don't think she weighs 145 pounds.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
John Grafey. I just wanted to come down to express my support for this.
Can you please give your name for the record?
John Grafey. As Councilmember O'Donnell mentioned, the growth of small business and home-based business into more successful businesses is what's going to carry us into the long term. I feel attracting large businesses that are going to give us that one-hit pop, but as soon as the economic situation changes, like Boeing, they'll just leave the city. I think the balancing our need to keep spending low on this, the thing to do would be create accelerator programs at Cal State Long Beach and LBCC to foster both business and computer science to create better tech companies here based in the city. And I think one of the things that we can do is we can look at the curriculums there at the schools to accelerate them to what's more cutting edge technology. I've been through the curriculums and they're probably 10 years behind what current technology is. So if we really want new fresh tech here, we have to really forward those programs. I've had trouble hiring people here from the city, from our schools that are up to date with what we're currently doing. So I think this is a great proposal, and I think this is the right way forward for Long Beach.
Thank you, John. And now I know, I recognize you, my Facebook friend.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other public comment, there's a motion on the floor. Please cast your votes.
Motion carries, 9 votes yes.
Moving on to the next item, Mr. Clerk, item number 7.
Item 7 is a report from the Office of Council Members Patrick O'Donnell, 4th District, with the recommendation to receive and file a report from staff on the Long Beach breakwater.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Great, it's breakwater time again. So in fact, I saw Ed Hendricks up there, who's certainly got us to where we are today, he and his whole team. But Ed, you were the one that kept pounding the pavement, along with others for sure, and knocking on doors and coming up to council and making sure that we always kept up our commitment to this need, which is the need for clean water and a better economy in Long Beach. I believe the citing in the last study was $52 million annual economic stimulus to Long Beach should we address the breakwater issue. So this is a noble cause. And we want to be wise about this. I want to say in the outset, we don't want to threaten the beachfront homes. We don't want to threaten the oil operations or maritime trade. I think all would agree with that. And so that's why this takes such careful study. And we look forward to that study. 3 years ago, the city entered into a historic partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers to move forward with the next phase of necessary study for the reconfiguration of the Long Beach breakwater. That's a wall of rocks about, what, a mile out there, about 1.5 miles long, that acts as a wall between clean water and dirtier water. The water doesn't turn over. And it also blocks out recreational opportunities, potentially through waves. We ran into some stumbling blocks along the road, namely funding and need for funds to come from the federal government. It's been a challenge, but there's been a change. Advocates, though, have kept the fight alive, and our Breakwater Awareness Month activities were bigger than ever. We had some new folks join us this year from this council. That was great, showing that there is significant interest in community support, and the support for this effort just keeps growing. The conversation has changed since we began this fight many years ago. Now it is the norm to have a discussion about reconfiguring the breakwater, whereas before we were seen as the radicals. Now the radicals are those that say do nothing. The status quo is adequate. We don't buy into that argument. Recently, as unveiled at our Breakwater Community Meeting, those were in June, we had a series of events. We had a paddle out. I didn't see anybody at the paddle out. but I certainly saw them at some meetings. And next year I hope to see some of you at the paddle out. That's a good event where we paddle out in memory of the waves, and my family's there. We all jump on a board and go on out. The Army Corps of Engineers has developed a new policy, and I'm sure Mr. Monica is going to explain that. It's the 3x3. It's the 333 proposal, wherein any future Army Corps study would be 3 inches thick, take 3 years to complete, and be under $3 million. So that's our challenge, to get this study moving, to get it done under those new guidelines. And Mr. Monica, what I'll do is, if we could, Mr. Vice Mayor, turn it over to him, and I have some questions for him.
Sure. Mr. Modica?
And I'll make a motion when he's completed.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council, and Councilmember O'Donnell. I wanted to give a very quick presentation of kind of where we are with this project and remind a little bit about the history as well. As the council member mentioned, it's been a long road, but we've actually made a lot of progress, and over the last several years, the city, as you recall, started its own reconnaissance study. It's something that was never really done before, broke ground there in terms of doing the study ourselves and moving this project forward. We've completed an Army Corps reconnaissance study where the Army Corps found that there's sufficient federal interest to move on to the next step, which is a feasibility study. We've got that important finding of federal interest where the Army Corps says that there is interest in moving forward with a further study of this project. We signed a federal cost sharing agreement, which is a formal agreement, as the council member mentioned, between the city and the Army Corps to do this project. And most notably, the City Council has identified the local funding. So the City Council has identified the city's share of the study, which is currently an $8 million study and costs approximately $4 million. We've identified $3.2 million in Tidelands funds and about $825,000 in in-kind service credit. And so what's changed is in the last couple months, we've been notified that there is this new study process. It's called 333, as Councilmember O'Donnell mentioned. It essentially says, let's shorten the amount of time that it takes to do a feasibility study. These studies are now going to take no longer than 3 years, cost no more than $3 million total, and be of a reasonable size. That's my favorite one. No more than 3-inch binder is what it should fit into. And so under this new scenario, we would still share 50% of the cost. We would have about $1.5 million of obligation, and the Army Corps would have $1.5 million. The goals would remain the same. We would evaluate projects and explore opportunities to promote ecosystem restoration, to improve water quality, to increase recreational activity opportunities, which could include waves and a number of other recreational opportunities, and of course to protect the existing infrastructure, homes and navigation and operations. One of the challenges that we are facing in the last several years is, although the council has stepped forward and put up money to fund this project, is finding the federal share. We're no longer able to go to Congress and ask for their funding. For Congress to fund it, it has to come through the president's budget. And of course, it's a very competitive funding environment. This chart shows you that year after year, we've had a reduction in funds, 21% in FY11, the same amount of cut in FY12, and in FY13 an additional 18% cut out of the funding source where we look for this. One of the important things too is that in the ecosystem restoration, we need to demonstrate connectivity and habitat scarcity, which is one of the challenges we're working on right now. To give you an idea of what that is, connectivity is the extent in which a project facilitates the movement of native species. And so we need to be able to demonstrate connectivity and show through science that there's a critical direct connection between East San Pedro Bay, the LA River, and the Pacific Ocean, and identify those species that benefit from that. We also have to talk about habitat scarcity and demonstrate habitat scarcity, which is the project will restore a nationally scarce habitat that has experienced a loss. And so we need to demonstrate that through published academic studies. And one of the things that we ask all of our partners or people that are interested in this is if you know of any studies out there that help to make these cases for connectivity or habitat scarcity, we'd love to hear from you. So I want to end the presentation with talking a little bit about next steps and what we're actually going to be asking for tonight at the council as well. We're going to have to determine how to rescope this federal study, how you take an $8 million and 4-year study and do it in $3 million, and what gets changed. Obviously, you're not going to do the same amount of study in $8 million that you would for $3 million. So that's going to have to be determined over the next year or so. We're going to have to renegotiate the agreement with the Army Corps. They've put us on notice that to renegotiate our agreement and to get it through their process is going to take a minimum of 6 to 9 months, after which you would actually be able to rescope. We're going to continue to seek funding from the President's budget. The cost to do this new 333, just to determine what that new plan is and how to rescope it, costs between $50,000 and $75,000, so we need to get the Corps some money to be able to do the rescoping. And then, of course, the federal share of their study is $1.5 million. And so what we'd like to ask the council tonight is for your direction to start negotiating the revised agreement to begin the study and to return to the council with the recommendation. We want to be able to negotiate with the Corps to see what that means. Is there a way that we can accelerate it? Is there a way that we can advance some funds possibly, or do something creative to move this project forward and return to you with a recommendation? And so that concludes my presentation. We have information for anybody that's interested about learning more about this project. You can look at the links above there, and we are available to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. So do we have a timeline for when you'll return?
We hope to return before the end of the year.
What could be the potential timeline for a start of the project itself?
This is a rough timeline, but if we can come back to the council with the ability to, before the end of the year with a proposal to renegotiate, then bring that to the Army Corps, it's going to take at least 6 to 9 months for them to execute that revised agreement. And then we need to be able to do the rescoping, which probably takes a month or two. So we're probably minimum looking at least a year before they're able to start their rescoping, and potentially longer than that.
Great, thank you. Might this study, this is a pretty comprehensive study, might it cost more than $3 million, or might it need more than $3 million?
As we understand the rules, and there's still a lot that we don't know about this project, about the 333, and the Corps is trying to do something brand new that they've never done before, so there's still a lot to learn. It is supposed to be at no more than $3 million, so if it costs more than $3 million, something needs to be cut to bring it down to costing no more than $3 million.
Okay. What if it did cost more than $3 million and we covered the back end of that $3 million?
That is one of our questions of the Army Corps, is if there are certain things that the council and the community want to look at, or do we have the ability to pay for those on our own? And so that's something we're still researching with the Corps.
Great. Could we also, the sand replenishment, and I know Gary, I think Gary would agree, is a huge issue out on the end of the peninsula. Listen, I walk out there on the weekends. I was there last night on the water, so I'm very familiar with that, on the ocean side specifically. Could we attempt to incorporate this in the issue? Because I think people feel threatened because the sand is is so close to homes at certain times during the season there. And in fact, we spend about $400,000 a year of city money lifting up sand at the foot of the Belmont Pier there, Veterans Pier, and moving it down to the end of the peninsula. So would we be able to potentially incorporate the sand replenishment issue in this?
Sand replenishment was always a part of the original study, the $8 million study, and so we would have to go through that process to rescope and see if that's something that's important to the city council and the community. Then we would keep that portion of it. Something else may need to be changed and modified to get under the $3 million cap, but yes, it could be included.
Great. Well, then I'll make a motion to request that the city council direct city management to start negotiating the revised agreement and the revised agreement with the Army Corps. Is that the motion that you had discussed?
Second?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a recommended motion from staff.
Thank you, Councilmember DeLong.
Okay, there's a motion and a second, and just to make sure that we're correct here, I know that the recommendation that we have originally is to receive and file, so we've changed the motion. That's okay, Mr. City Attorney? Excellent. Okay, we have a first and second. Other speakers? Councilmember DeLong.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember O'Donnell, for bringing this forward. I wonder if there's a way, perhaps a friendly amendment. Let's talk to staff first. You mentioned there's perhaps an incremental cost of $50,000 or so for the Corps to move forward on downsizing or revising the scope.
Correct.
And I guess I just wonder if there's an appetite for the council to appropriate some of the funding that we've already set aside so that staff can move forward in that endeavor. Mr. O'Donnell, what do you think?
I'd be happy to incorporate that into the motion.
Okay.
And again, we did, last year or so, we did set aside some money, and I'm assuming that's where you're...
That's the money I'm
where
referring
you're
to.
taking.
Rather than lose more time for staff to come back, I think the council is certainly receptive to appropriating some of these funds.
Great, thank you for your support.
Okay. Mr. DeLong, anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Johnson.
Well, thank you, Vice Mayor. My question for staff is, can you go a little more in depth in the funding process? The president needs to put this in the president's budget. There's a couple people here who probably have voted for this president and others who haven't, and that's fine. But he is all of our president. What do we need to lobby this president and lobby our representatives, whether it's our Congress members, our senators. So what can we do as council members to get the president in future years to move this forward? And what agency in particular, is the EPA or what agency determines this? And maybe just go into that, what that process is.
Sure. The process has changed over the years. It used to be something that this council could say, we want this to be our appropriations request, and we're going to go ask our Congress member to put it in the federal budget. It's a local priority. It's got community support. For the last several years, the appropriations process and appropriations requests have not been allowed. Those are the so-called earmarks. And so it's changed the ability of agencies like the city to go after certain funds. And so we have to go now to the Army Corps and ask them to include it in their budget. It goes through the Army Corps budgeting process. It gets to the Office of Management and Budget, which is the president's budget arm, and they give certain direction on what their priorities are. It's a process that we're not always privy to. We don't know exactly where in the process our project is. We believe that we do have the support of our local Army Corps office, but it's also a cost benefit. The president has put out that he believes projects that have the highest cost benefit should be moving forward given the limited amount of funds. And so, doing things like getting our connectivity up and our habitat scarcity up and showing that we've got our local funds, and I think the council's done a lot of those things. But continuing to talk to the Army Corps about what a priority this is, and talking to our delegation and making sure that they know. And this council's been very supportive in doing those things, but we can always continue to do more.
So what it sounds like you're saying is the Army Corps in the past, at least at the national level, has not funded this in their budget, as far as the president's budget, and we'd be looking for the Army Corps to include it in their budget in the future. Is that correct?
That's correct. We make that request every year. What we're actually asking you to do as well is give us the ability to go negotiate and see if we can find a solution. The cost is now a lot less than what it used to be. If we can potentially prime the pump, or if we can do some other creative financial solutions that I'm hearing the council is interested in moving forward in the rescoping, putting things like that on the table to see if we can get this project going. That might help our funding chances.
And even though there's no longer earmarking, is it correct that, and would it be appropriate, for example, let's say Senator Feinstein were in the room right now, and we said, Senator Feinstein, we need your help in moving this project forward. It has tremendous benefits, not just for Long Beach, but for the region, for water quality, for connectivity. Could you send a letter of support to the Army Corps, for example? Would that be an appropriate thing for the senator to do? And maybe she's already done that, but just curious.
Yes, as I understand the ethics rules, they are allowed to ask the president or the agencies to fund certain projects, but they're not allowed to stick an actual appropriation into a bill that has an earmark. And those, of course, are House and Senate rules. It's the way that they create their own rules for how to fund things. And we have asked our members, and they have sent letters as well asking for these projects. And they've met personally. Congressman Richardson, I know, has met with Army Corps staff, and as a federal legislative delegation, our city council go back and our mayor meet with the Army Corps as well and talk about this project.
Okay, great. And I would just continue to encourage our federal legislation committee to press this and see what we can do to get this done.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lowenthal.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Mr. Modica, as well as everyone on the city manager's team, as well as the city manager, for the diligence that they've expressed these last several years with this project. As optimistic as we get and as hopeful as we are about the progress that can be made, I hope we're not losing sight of the progress certainly that has been made. I recall when this item first came, and it was years ago, but I do think there's been a tremendous amount of progress that's been made, and it's done in a way that's defensible, and it tries to accomplish as many goals as possible. I am optimistic about this next phase in our pursuit for information about the benefits and costs of removing and modifying the breakwater. It's very hard to see photos of folks surfing back in the day and enjoying the waves without feeling a little nostalgic about what could have been or what certainly could be. And I know that many of the proponents certainly are hopeful for that. I do think it's worth noting, as I said, that in the last 5 years we've been talking about and studying the breakwater. The city has made real improvements to the beach water quality, getting top grades from heel to bay, and every now and then there's a hiccup that's out of our control. But so those are certainly improvements that are made. So thank you for that, and thank you for not losing sight of our motivations toward that end as well. And with that, I'm very glad Mr. Councilmember O'Donnell brought this forward as a check-in point and see how we get to the next steps. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Neal.